7. Vīrya Pāramitā. How does the Bodhisattva go about cultivating vigor? If vigor is cultivated for the sake of bringing about self-benefit, benefit of others, and the combined benefit of both, one becomes able thereby to adorn the path to Bodhi. In his cultivation of vigor, the Bodhisattva is motivated by a wish to so train and discipline beings that they are caused to abandon suffering and affliction. One who cultivates vigor is diligent at all times in cultivating the accumulation of practices associated with the pure Brahman conduct, and in abandoning laziness and refraining from negligence. One's mind remains constantly vigorous and diligent, and never retreats or sinks away, even in the midst of endeavors which are freighted with difficulty, and which yield one no personal benefits. This is what qualifies as the mind of vigor, as initially cultivated by the Bodhisattva. On account of cultivating vigor, one becomes able to gain the supremely marvelous and good worldly transcendental dharmas. This is what is meant by self-benefit. One teaches and transforms beings in a way which causes them to take up the diligent cultivation of goodness. This is what is meant by benefit of others. On the basis of those right causes for Bodhi which one has cultivated, one teaches beings, thus causing them to gain benefit identical to one's own. This is what is meant by combined benefit. By cultivating vigor, one gains ever more supreme, pure, and marvelous fruits, and oversteps bodhisattva stages, even to the point that one succeeds in swiftly realizing the right enlightenment. This is what is meant by adorning the path to Bodhi. There are two types of vigor. The first is that which is cultivated for the sake of seeking the unsurpassed path. The second type is that wherein one generates vigor as a consequence of wishing to extensively extricate and rescue beings immersed in suffering. It is through perfecting 10 recollections that one becomes able to initiate the resolve to diligently practice vigor. What then are those 10? They are: first, one recollects the incalculably many meritorious qualities of the Buddhas. Second, one recollects the inconceivable and indescribable liberation brought about by the Dharma. Third, one recollects the Sangha's purity and freedom from defilements. Fourth, one recollects that it is through practice of the great kindness that one succeeds in establishing beings on the path. Fifth, one recollects that it is through practice of the great compassion that one extricates and rescues beings from the many sorts of suffering. Sixth, one recollects that it is the accumulation of right meditative absorptions that encourages delight in the cultivation of goodness. Seventh, one recollects those who are involved in the accumulation of wrong meditative absorptions and strives to extricate them from such entrapment, thereby causing them to turn back to the original state. Eighth, one recollects the hunger, thirst, and fiery afflictions of the hungry ghosts. Ninth, one recollects the long endurance of manifold sufferings undergone by the animals. 10th, one recollects the extensive experience of being roasted and boiled undergone by those residing in the hells. The Bodhisattva then contemplates these 10 recollections in this manner. I must cultivate and accumulate the meritorious qualities possessed by the Triple Jewel. I must encourage and instigate the practice of kindness, compassion, and right meditative concentration. I must extricate and rescue those beings immersed in wrong meditative absorptions and those beings suffering in the 3 wretched rebirth destinies. When one contemplates in this manner, one's mindfulness becomes ever more focused and undistracted. One diligently cultivates in this manner both day and night, and thus remains free of any sort of relaxation or deterioration of one's efforts. It is this which qualifies one to be able to generate vigor, characterized by right mindfulness. The vigor of the Bodhisattva is possessed of 4 additional factors. This involves the cultivation of what is referred to as the path of the 4 right efforts. Whatsoever bad dharmas have not yet arisen, one blocks them off and does not allow them to rise. Whatsoever bad dharmas have already arisen, one swiftly causes them to be eliminated and cut off. Whatsoever good dharmas have not yet arisen, one institutes skillful means by which they are caused to arise. Whatsoever good dharmas have already arisen, one cultivates them to fullness, causing them to increase and become more expansive. When the Bodhisattva cultivates the path of the 4 right efforts in this manner, doing so without resting, this is what qualifies as vigor. This diligent practice of vigor is able to destroy all afflicted mental states, while also bringing about increase in the right causes or realization of the unsurpassed Bodhi. If the Bodhisattva is able to endure all of the great sufferings which befall both body and mind, doing so out of a desire to establish beings in the path, and if he is able, in doing so, to remain free of weariness, it is this which qualifies as vigor. Having departed far from the deceptiveness and wrongly directed vigor typical of an evil age, the Bodhisattva cultivates right vigor. This is to say that in cultivating faith, giving, moral virtue, patience, meditative concentration, wisdom, kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, whether it be with respect to prospective endeavors, past endeavors, or current endeavors, he constantly practices vigor with ultimate sincerity while remaining free of any sort of regret. In his cultivation of all good dharmas, and in his extrication and rescue of beings from the many sorts of suffering, he does so with the same urgency as someone putting out a fire in his own turban, never allowing his determination to retreat or sink away. This is what is meant by vigor. Although the Bodhisattva cherishes no particular regard for his own physical life, still, for the sake of extricating beings from the many sorts of suffering, and for the sake of protecting right Dharma, he should in fact retain a form of cherishing wherein he refrains from relinquishing the stately comportment requiring perfectly appropriate behavior, while proceeding with constancy to cultivate good dharmas. When he cultivates good dharmas, his mind remains free of indolence. Even were he to encounter a time when he might be required to sacrifice his life Still, he refrains from forsaking his conformity with Dharma. This is what is meant by the Bodhisattva's diligent implementation of vigor as he pursues cultivation of the path to Bodhi. A person who is subject to indolence remains unable to give up everything at once. He is also unable to uphold the moral precepts, maintain patience with the many sorts of suffering, diligently implement vigor, focus his thoughts in meditative concentration, or distinguish between what is good and what is bad. It is for this reason that it is said that the 6 pāramitās are able to progressively increase on account of vigor. If the vigor practiced by a bodhisattva mahasattva grows ever more superior, then he becomes able to swiftly gain realization of anuttara samyak sambodhi. In the bodhisattva's initiation of the great adornment and in his bringing forth of vigor, there are 4 additional component factors. First, he initiates the great adornment. Second, he accumulates heroic strength. Third, he cultivates all manner of roots of goodness. Fourth, he teaches and transforms beings. How is it that the bodhisattva initiates the great adornment? His mind becomes able to endure the prospect of all of the births and deaths involved on the bodhisattva path to Buddhahood, and thus takes no account of the number of kalpas involved. Even the prospect of passing through boundlessly many hundreds of thousands of myriads of kotis of nayutas, of Ganges sands, of asamkhyeyas of kalpas, before being able then to perfectly realize the path to Buddhahood, is not such as causes his mind to become weary. This is what is referred to as the vigor wherein one is not lax in carrying on with adornment. The bodhisattva accumulates heroic strength as he proceeds with bringing forth vigor. Even if the worlds of the great trichiliocosm were brimming with raging fire, still, if it were necessary to pass through this fire for the sake of being able to encounter the Buddha and hear the Dharma, for the sake of establishing beings in good dharmas, he would do just that. When he proceeds in this way for the sake of training and subduing beings, and on the basis of having well established his own mind in the great compassion, this is what qualifies as heroic strength in the practice of vigor. The bodhisattva brings forth vigor in his cultivation of roots of goodness, and no matter what roots of every kind of goodness he has developed, he dedicates them all to anuttara samyak sambodhi, doing so for the sake of being able to perfect all knowledge. It is this which qualifies as vigor in the cultivation of roots of goodness. As the bodhisattva teaches and transforms beings, he brings forth vigor. The nature of beings is that they are inestimably many. In number, they are as immeasurable and boundless as empty space itself. Still, the bodhisattva establishes a vow: I shall bring them all, without exception, across to liberation. For the sake of transforming them and bringing them across to liberation, he is diligent in his practice of vigor. It is this which qualifies as vigor in teaching and transforming beings. To speak of the essentials, the bodhisattva cultivates the path provision of merit in support of his development of unsurpassable wisdom. In his cultivation and accumulation of these dharmas essential to Buddhahood, he brings forth vigor. The merit of the Buddhas is incalculable and boundless. The vigor practiced by the Bodhisattva Mahasattva as he proceeds with the great adornment is incalculable and boundless in just the same way. In the Bodhisattva Mahasattva's cultivation of vigor, his mind is not such as abandons zeal. This is because he proceeds with extricating beings from the many sorts of sufferings. It is this, then, which brings about perfection of Vīrya Pāramitā. Eight. Dhyāna Pāramitā. How does the Bodhisattva go about cultivating jhana absorption? If jhana absorption is cultivated for the sake of bringing about self-benefit, benefit of others, and the combined benefit of both, one then becomes able to adorn the path to Bodhi. In his cultivation of jhana absorption, the Bodhisattva is motivated by a wish to so train and discipline beings that they are caused to abandon suffering and affliction. One who cultivates jhana absorption skillfully focuses his mind and does not allow any distracted thoughts to interfere through the introduction of what is false. When walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, one's mindfulness remains anchored directly before one. Both upwards and downwards, one contemplates the skeleton, tracing from the top of the skull on down through the spine, tracing from the upper arm bones on through the elbows, and so forth, tracing from the chest on through the rib bones, and tracing from the pelvic bones on through the shin bones, the ankle bones, and so forth. And counting the breaths, one cultivates anapana. This is what qualifies as the mind of meditative absorption as initially cultivated by the Bodhisattva. On account of cultivating jhana absorption, one does not indulge the many sorts of evil thought, but rather always experiences blissfulness. This is what is meant by self-benefit. One teaches and transforms beings, causing them to cultivate right mindfulness. This is what is meant by benefit of others. On the basis of that pure samadhi which one has cultivated, that which abandons evil ideation, vitakka, and mental discursion, vichara, one teaches beings, thus causing them to gain benefit identical to one's own. This is what is meant by combined benefit. On account of cultivating jhana absorption, one gains realization of the 8 liberations and so forth, until we come to the Shurangama and Vajra samadhis. This is what is meant by adorning the path to Bodhi. Jhana absorption arises from 3 dharmas. What are those 3? They are: first, it arises from learning-derived wisdom, shrutamaya. Second, it arises from deliberation-derived wisdom, chintamaya. Third, it arises from meditation-derived wisdom, bhavanamaya. These 3 dharmas gradually produce all of the samadhis. What is meant by learning-derived wisdom, shrutamaya? In accordance with whatever dharma one has heard, one's mind always relates to it with fondness and happiness. One additionally thinks, such dharmas of the Buddha as the uninterrupted path Anantaraya Marga, and the path of liberation, Vimukti Marga, must be perfected on the basis of abundant learning. Having had this thought, whenever the opportunity arises to seek out the Dharma, one increases the intensity of his vigor so that day and night he always delights in tirelessly listening to the Dharma. This is what is meant by learning derived wisdom. What then is meant by deliberation derived wisdom, Chintamaya? One ponders and analytically contemplates all conditioned dharmas in accordance with their true character. This refers to contemplating. They are impermanent, conduce to suffering, are empty, are devoid of self, are impure, are produced and cease in each successive thought moment, Shanna Kshanna Utpanna Nirodha, and are bound to undergo ruination before long. Beings are bound up in worry, lamentation, suffering, affliction, detestation, and affection. Their existence is solely a matter of being burned up by the fire of covetousness, hatred, and delusion, while increasing the great accumulation of suffering to be undergone in later existences. Conditioned dharmas have no reality-based nature and are analogous to a magically conjured illusion or a supernatural transformation. Having made such observations as these, one straightway generates renunciation for all conditioned dharmas, and, with ever-increasing intensity, diligently proceeds to pursue the wisdom of the Buddha. One deliberates further and realizes that the wisdom of the Tathagata is inconceivable, ineffable, and incalculable, is possessed of great power, is unconquerable, is able to transport one to the great city of fearlessness and safety, is not such that can be turned back, and is able to rescue countless suffering and afflicted beings. One develops such knowledge and vision regarding the immeasurable wisdom of the Buddha, perceives that conditioned dharmas are freighted with an incalculable amount of suffering and affliction, and resolves then to advance, seeking to cultivate according to the unsurpassed great vehicle. This is what is meant by deliberation-derived wisdom. What is meant by meditation-derived wisdom, bhavanamaya? All meditation practice occurring from the initial meditative contemplation of the skeleton on through to anuttara samyak sambodhi falls into the category of meditation-derived wisdom. Leaving behind desire and unwholesome dharmas, still retaining ideation and mental discursion, vitarka vichara, and experiencing the joy and bliss born of abandonment, one enters the first jhana. One then causes the cessation of ideation and mental discursion, abides in inward purity, and focuses the mind in a single place, free of ideation and mental discursion, and experiencing the joy and bliss born of concentration. One enters the second jhana. On account of leaving behind joy, one experiences equanimity in the sphere of the formative factors aggregate. One's mind abides in mindfulness. One is established in discerning knowing. And one experiences physically based bliss, of the sort which Aryas are able to acquire, while still maintaining equanimity towards it. In a state of meditative stabilization, samadhi, and experiencing feeling-based bliss, one enters the third jhana. On account of having cut off suffering and having cut off bliss, this on the basis of having earlier caused the cessation of distress and joy, abiding in a state wherein one feels neither suffering nor bliss, coursing in pure equanimity, and possessed of mindfulness which is pure, one enters the fourth jhana. On account of transcending perception of all aspects of physical forms, on account of causing cessation of any perception of duality-based characteristics, as with the subject-object duality of sense faculties versus sense objects, and on account of refraining from bearing in mind any marks of differentiation, one then comes to know the state of boundless space, and straightway enters the station of the boundless space formless absorption. Having transcended all aspects of empty space, one comes to know the state of boundless consciousness, and straightway enters the station of the boundless consciousness formless absorption. Having transcended all aspects of consciousness, one then comes to know the state of nothing whatsoever, and straightway enters into the formless realm absorption known as the station of nothing whatsoever. Having transcended the station of nothing whatsoever, one then comes to know the state of neither perception nor non-perception, and then, having experienced peace and security therein, one straightway enters into the formless realm's station of neither perception nor non-perception. Through merely acquiescing in these dharmas associated with one's practice of these meditation states, while refraining all the while from indulging any attachment to the bliss associated with them, one continues to seek realization of the most supreme form of right enlightenment found in the unsurpassed vehicle. The above instances exemplify what is meant by meditation-derived wisdom, bhavanamaya. Through learning-derived wisdom, deliberation-derived wisdom, and meditation-derived wisdom, the Bodhisattva cultivates intense diligence in focusing the mind. He then becomes able to equip himself with the samadhis associated with the spiritual penetrations and clarities, and proceeds to perfect Dhyāna Pāramitā. Furthermore, in the Bodhisattva's cultivation of meditative absorption, there are an additional 10 Dharma practices which are not held in common with either the Shravaka disciples or the Pratyeka Buddhas. What are those 10? They are: first, in the cultivation of meditative absorption, he remains free of attachment to a self, this through perfecting the jhana absorptions of the Tathagata. Second, in the cultivation of meditative absorption, he refrains from indulging any enjoyment of the delectability of their associated blisses, and refrains from becoming attached to them, this on account of renouncing and abandoning defiled thought, and on account of refraining from seeking his own pleasure. Third, in the cultivation of meditative absorption, he engages in the work necessary to develop the spiritual penetrations, this for the sake of knowing the mental activity of beings. Fourth, in the cultivation of meditative absorption, done for the sake of knowing the manifold varieties of beings' thoughts, it is undertaken for the purpose of bringing all beings across to liberation. Fifth, in the cultivation of meditative absorption, he practices the great compassion, this for the sake of severing the affliction-based fetters of all beings. Sixth, in cultivating meditative absorption, he develops a skillful understanding of how to enter and exit the jhana samadhis, This because he transcends the three realms. 7th, in cultivating meditative absorption, he always abides in a state of sovereign independence. This because he perfects all good dharmas. 8th, in cultivating meditative absorption, his mind abides in a state of quiescent cessation. This because his practice is supreme over the jhana samadhis of the two vehicles. 9th, in cultivating meditative absorption, he constantly enters a state governed by wisdom. This because he has transcended all worlds and has reached the other shore. 10th, in cultivating meditative absorption, he is able to bring about the flourishing of right Dharma. This because he inherits and carries on the lineage of the three jewels, ensuring that it will not be cut off. Meditative absorption of these sorts is not such as is held in common with the Shravaka disciples or the Pratyeka Buddhas. Additionally, one cultivates and accumulates all of the dharmas of jhana absorption for the sake of knowing the afflicted thoughts of beings. One thus assists the development of the mind of stabilization and causes this jhana absorption to abide with a mind of uniformly equal regard for all. This is what is meant by meditative absorption. If one gains meditative absorptions such as these, then this is equal to the realization of emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, and effortlessness. If one has achieved the equal of emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, and effortlessness, then one achieves uniformly equal regard for all beings. If one achieves uniformly equal regard for all beings, then one achieves the state wherein all dharmas are beheld with uniformly equal regard. When one has entered a state characterized by uniformly equal regard of this sort, then this is what is meant by meditative absorption. Furthermore, although the Bodhisattva adapts to the world as he carries on his practice, still he does not admix it with the mundane. He relinquishes the 8 worldly dharmas and brings about the cessation of the fetters. He departs far from clamorous boisterousness and takes pleasure in abiding in a place of solitude. The Bodhisattva cultivates the practice of jhana absorption in a manner such as this. His mind becomes established in a state of stabilization, and he abandons worldly endeavors. Also, in cultivating meditative absorption, the Bodhisattva does so for the sake of equipping himself with the spiritual penetrations, knowing awareness, skillful means, and wisdom. What is meant by spiritual penetrations? What is meant by knowing awareness? Whether it be in the sphere of seeing even distant characteristics of form, whether it be in the sphere of hearing even distant sounds, whether it be in knowing others' thoughts, whether it be in the sphere of remembering lifetimes already in the past, or whether it be in the sphere of the ability to go anywhere in any Buddha world, these are all subsumed in what is meant by spiritual penetrations. Where one knows that forms are identical with the nature of dharmas, where one completely understands the nature of sound and the actions of the mind, where one perceives the quiescent cessation of both nature and phenomenal characteristics, where one regards the 3 periods of time with uniformly equal regard, and where one knows the Buddha lands as characterized by being identical to empty space, and yet refrains from opting for the final realization of complete cessation. This corresponds to knowing awareness. What then is meant by skillful means, and what is meant by wisdom? Where, when entering jhana absorption, one brings forth the great kindness and compassion, refrains from forsaking one's vows, keeps one's mind as solid as Vajra, contemplates all of the Buddha worlds, and carries on with the adornment of the Bodhi Mandala. This corresponds to skillful means. Where one's mind abides in eternal quiescence and remains free of the concepts of self and beings. Where one remains undistracted in one's meditation on the fundamental nature of all dharmas. Where one perceives all Buddha worlds as identical to empty space, and where one contemplates that whatsoever one adorns is identical to quiescent cessation. This corresponds to wisdom. This is what is meant by the Bodhisattvas being distinctly different on the basis of his exercise of spiritual penetrations, knowing awareness, skillful means, and wisdom, while cultivating jhana absorption. Through complete practice of these four matters, one succeeds in drawing close to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. When the Bodhisattva Mahasattva cultivates jhana absorption, he remains free of any extraneous or evil thoughts. It is by resort to the Dharma of remaining unmoving that one then perfects Dhyāna Pāramitā. Prajñā Pāramitā. How does the Bodhisattva go about cultivating wisdom? If wisdom is cultivated for the sake of bringing about self-benefit, benefit of others, and the combined benefit of both, one becomes able thereby to adorn the path to Bodhi. In his cultivation of wisdom, the Bodhisattva is motivated by a wish to so train and discipline beings that they are caused to abandon suffering and affliction. One who cultivates wisdom studies all aspects of worldly phenomena, abandons covetousness, hatred, and delusion, establishes himself in the mind of kindness, pities and benefits all beings, constantly bears in mind extricating and rescuing beings, serves as a guide for beings, and is able to distinguish and explain what constitutes the right path, what constitutes the erroneous path, and what constitutes the karmic retribution linked to good and bad karmic actions. This is what qualifies as the mind of wisdom as initially cultivated by the Bodhisattva. On account of cultivating wisdom, one separates far from ignorance, rids oneself of the affliction-based obstacles, and rids oneself of the obstacles to cognition. This is what is meant by self-benefit. One teaches and transforms beings in a manner whereby they are caused to become trained and disciplined. This is what is meant by benefit of others. On the basis of that advancement towards the unsurpassed Bodhi which one has already cultivated, one teaches beings, thus causing them to gain benefit identical to one's own. This is what is meant by combined benefit. On account of cultivating wisdom, one gains the first Bodhisattva ground, and so forth until one reaches the Sarvagnya wisdom of omniscience. This is what is meant by adorning the path to Bodhi. In the Bodhisattva's cultivation of wisdom, there are 20 kinds of mind through which he is able to gradually bring about its establishment. What are those 20? One must generate the mind which, with wholesome motivation, seeks to draw personally close to the good spiritual guide, the mind which abandons arrogance and refrains from negligence, the mind which complies with teachings and delights in listening to the Dharma, the mind which remains insatiable in listening to Dharma while also skillfully contemplating its meanings, the mind which practices the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 immeasurable minds, and cultivates right wisdom, the mind which courses in the reflection on the unlovely, asubha sanya, and thereby generates renunciation, the mind which contemplates the 4 truths and 16 mind states of the Arya, the mind which contemplates the 12 causes and conditions and cultivates the 3 clarities and wisdoms, the mind which listens to teachings on the pāramitās and remains mindful and zealous in cultivating them, the mind which contemplates impermanence, suffering, non-self, and quiescent cessation, the mind which contemplates emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, and effortlessness, the mind which contemplates the abundant faults and vulnerabilities to misfortune inhering in the aggregates, sense realms, and sense basis, the mind which conquers and subdues the afflictions and recognizes that they are not one's friends, the mind which guards all good dharmas and recognizes that they are one's friends, the mind which suppresses and controls bad dharmas and causes them to be cut off, the mind which cultivates right dharma and causes it to increase and become widespread, the mind which, although it cultivates dharmas held in common with the 2 vehicles, constantly relinquishes and abandons allegiance to those vehicles themselves, the mind which listens to teachings from the treasury of Bodhisattva scriptures and delights in upholding them in practice, the mind which, in benefiting self and others, acquiesces in the increasing development of all forms of good karmic deeds, the mind which upholds the genuine practices and seeks out all dharmas of the Buddha. Furthermore, in the Bodhisattva's cultivation of wisdom, there are 10 additional dharmas of skillful contemplative thought which are not held in common with the Shravaka disciples or the Pratyeka Buddhas. What are those 10? They consist of the contemplation and distinguishing of the roots of meditative absorption and wisdom, the contemplation of the faults inhering in failing to relinquish the 2 extreme views of annihilationism and eternalism, the contemplation of the dharmas involved in production arising through causes and conditions, the contemplation of the non-existence of a being, a self, a person, or a life, the contemplation of the non-existence of the dharmas of the 3 periods of time, whether past, future, or abiding, the contemplation of the non-existence of any implementation of action, even while the efficacy of cause and effect is still not cut off, the contemplation of the emptiness of dharmas, while still not desisting from planting the karmic seeds of good deeds, the contemplation of signlessness, while still continuing to bring beings across to liberation without any deterioration in those efforts, the contemplation of wishlessness, while still not abandoning the quest for Bodhi. the contemplation of effortlessness, while still not forsaking the taking on of physical bodies to carry out the Bodhisattva's endeavors. Furthermore, the Bodhisattva has an additional 12 skillful entries into Dharma gateways. What are those 12? They are: he skillfully enters the samadhis of emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, and so forth, and yet refrains from opting to take up their complete realization. He skillfully enters the jhana samadhis, and yet does not acquiesce in taking rebirth in the jhana heavens. He skillfully enters the spiritual penetrations and knowledges, and yet does not take up final realization of the Dharma of transcending outflow impurities. He skillfully enters the dharmas of inwardly directed contemplation, yet avoids realization of the right and definite position, samyaktva niyama. He skillfully enters the contemplation of all beings as empty and quiescently still, and yet still does not relinquish the great kindness. He skillfully contemplates all beings as devoid of self, and yet does not relinquish the great compassion. He skillfully enters rebirth amid the wretched destinies, and yet it is never on account of any karmic deeds that he is therefore reborn there. He skillfully enters the abandonment of desire, and yet he does not take up complete realization of the dharmas by which desire is entirely abandoned. He skillfully enters the renunciation of bliss associated with desire, and yet does not renounce dharma bliss. He skillfully enters the relinquishing of the ideations characteristic of all frivolous discourse, and yet he still does not relinquish the contemplations which are consonant with skillful means. He skillfully enters the contemplation of the many faults and misfortunes inherent in conditioned dharmas, and yet he still does not abandon the realm of conditioned dharmas. He skillfully enters the purity and far-reaching transcendence of unconditioned dharmas, and yet still he does not take up residence in the unconditioned. Even while the Bodhisattva is able to engage in cultivating all good gateways into the Dharma, he is simultaneously able to well comprehend that the 3 periods of time are empty and devoid of inherent existence. Where one successfully carries out this contemplation, it is through the power of wisdom, which contemplates the emptiness of the 3 periods of time. In a case where one dedicates to unexcelled Bodhi the merit from rejoicing in and emulating all of the incalculable merit created by all Buddhas of the 3 periods of time, this qualifies as the Bodhisattva's skillful means in well contemplating the 3 periods of time. Additionally, although one perceives that those dharmas of the past, which have already come to an end, do not extend into the future, still one constantly cultivates goodness, remaining vigorous and refraining from desisting. One contemplates that although the dharmas of the future have no production by which they come into existence, still one does not relinquish one's practice of vigor and vows to go forth toward Bodhi. One contemplates that although the dharmas of the present are newly destroyed in each successive thought moment, still one's mind refrains from neglecting them, and thus one nonetheless sets out toward Bodhi. This is what is meant by the Bodhisattva's skillful means in contemplating the 3 periods of time. As for what is in the past, it has already been destroyed. As for what is in the future, it has not yet arrived. As for what is in the present, it does not abide. Although one contemplates in this manner the production, destruction, scattering, and demolition of mind dharmas and dharmas belonging to the mind, one nonetheless remains constant in not relinquishing the accumulation of roots of goodness and the accumulation of dharmas assisting realization of Bodhi. This is what is meant by the Bodhisattva's skillful means in contemplating the 3 periods of time. Additionally, the Bodhisattva contemplates all dharmas, good and not good, self and non-self, real and unreal, empty and non-empty, worldly truth and ultimate truth, right meditative absorption and wrong meditative absorption, the conditioned and the unconditioned, outflow impurities and absence of outflow impurities, black dharmas and white dharmas, birth and death and nirvana. He contemplates them all as being like the very nature of the Dharma realm, as being of but a singular characteristic, as being signless. Among all of these, there does not exist any Dharma known as signlessness, nor does there exist any inherently existent Dharma which might be deemed signless. This then qualifies as the imprint of all Dharmas, the indestructible imprint. Even within this imprint, there is no characteristic of any imprint. This constitutes the Prajñā Pāramitā, as manifest in the skillful means arising from genuine wisdom. The Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in this manner and should practice in this manner. One who practices in this manner straightway draws close to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Even as the Bodhisattva Mahasattva cultivates wisdom, his mind remains free of anything being practiced. This because the very nature of dharmas is itself pure. This then constitutes the basis by which one perfects Prajñā Pāramitā. The Dharma gateway of accordance with reality. If there be sons or daughters of good family who cultivate the 6 pāramitās and thereby seek Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, they should abandon 7 dharmas. What are those 7? They are: first, one abandons the bad spiritual guide. As for the bad spiritual guide, this refers to one who instructs people to relinquish superior faith, superior zeal, and superior vigor, while instructing them to accumulate many different miscellaneous practices. Second, one abandons lust for the female form, covetous attachment, indulgence in desire, and the improper familiarity with worldly people, whereby one pursues involvement with them. Third, one abandons unwholesome ideation, wherein one contemplates one's physical form and countenance, wherein one indulges covetous cherishing of them, wherein one esteems them with fondness, wherein one retains a defiled attachment for them, seeking to protect them, and wherein one reckons one can preserve them for a long time. Fourth, one abandons hatred and anger, violence and arrogance, envy and jealousy. This because they promote contentiousness and disputation, while corrupting and confusing the mind devoted to goodness. Fifth, one abandons negligence, arrogance, indolence, and the reliance on minor forms of goodness as a basis for being disdainful towards others. Sixth, one abandons non-Buddhist texts and treatises, compositions and verses devoted to worldly concerns, and artificially decorous words and phrases. One should not praise or recite anything not taught by the Buddha. Seventh, one should not allow oneself to draw close to wrong or unwholesome views. Dharmas such as these seven are such as one should abandon. The Tathagata has stated, "I do not see any other dharmas aside from these which are more profoundly capable of blocking the path to Buddhahood." Therefore, the Bodhisattva should distance himself from dharmas such as these seven. If one wishes to swiftly realize the unsurpassed Bodhi, he should cultivate 7 dharmas. What are those 7? They are: first, the Bodhisattva should draw personally close to the good spiritual guide. As for the good spiritual guide, this refers to the Buddhas as well as the Bodhisattvas. In an instance where a Shravaka disciple is able to cause a Bodhisattva to abide in the treasury of profound dharmas and in the pāramitās, he too may serve as the good spiritual guide for a Bodhisattva. Second, the Bodhisattva should draw personally close to the Dharma of leaving behind the householder's life, and he should also personally draw close to the Dharma of the Aranya, hermitage. He should abandon lust for the female form, as well as all indulgences of desire, while also refraining from participating in endeavors with worldly people. Third, the Bodhisattva should regard his own physical form as being like soil made from manure, which is filled only with stinking filth, and through which there courses winds, chills, heat, and blood, but which has nothing about it worthy of covetous attachment. He should regard it as pursuing a daily progression towards death, as suitable to be contemplated with thoughts of renunciation, and as a cause for the determination to take up intensely diligent cultivation of the path. Fourth, the Bodhisattva should constantly practice harmonious patience, respectfulness, and gentle accommodation. He should also encourage and teach others in a way whereby they are caused to abide in patience. Fifth, the Bodhisattva should cultivate vigor, should constantly bring forth a sense of shame and a sense of blame, should respectfully serve teachers and elders, should take pity on the poverty-stricken and lowly, and should physically stand in for those he observes to be beset by hardship and suffering. Sixth, the Bodhisattva should cultivate the Vaipulya Great Vehicle's Bodhisattva treasury, and should accept, uphold, study, and recite dharmas praised by the Buddha. Seventh, the Bodhisattva should draw close to and cultivate the ultimate truth, namely, the true character of dharmas, the singular character of dharmas, and the absence of any real characteristics in any dharma. If bodhisattvas wish to swiftly reach realization of the unsurpassed Bodhi, then they should draw close to these 7 dharmas. Additionally, if a person retaining the concept of there being anything to be gained generates the Bodhi resolve and then proceeds to cultivate kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, giving, moral virtue, patience, vigor, jhana absorption, and wisdom, doing so for an incalculable number of asamkhyas of kalpas, one should realize that on account of retaining the concept of something to be gained, such a person will not succeed in leaving behind birth and death, and will not succeed in progressing towards Bodhi. Why is this? It is on account of his retaining the thought of something to be gained, as well as on account of his view conceiving the existence of attainment, his view conceiving the existence of the aggregates, sense realms, and sense basis, his view conceiving the existence of a self, his view conceiving the existence of a person, his view conceiving the existence of a being, his view conceiving the existence of a life, his view conceiving the existence of kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, giving, moral virtue, patience, vigor, meditative absorption, and wisdom. To sum up what is essential, the view conceiving the existence of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, as well as the view conceiving the existence of nirvana, views such as these, which conceive the existence of something to be gained, are just strains of thought rooted in attachment. As for attachment, this is what is referred to as wrong view. Why? Persons with wrong views are those who circulate about within the three realms, remaining eternally separated from the essential means of escape. This person who indulges in attachments is of just this very sort. He remains eternally separated from the essential means of escape, and thus, even to the very end, remains unable to realize Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. If a person generates the Bodhi resolve, he should contemplate this mind as characterized by emptiness. What is meant by this mind, and what is meant by characterized by emptiness? Mind refers to the mind consciousness. It is just the mind sense base and mind sense realm subsumed within the consciousness aggregate. As for the mind being characterized by emptiness, the mind itself is devoid of any mind characteristic, and is also devoid of any agent of actions. How is this the case? Any mind characteristics are themselves empty of any inherent existence. Nothing exists which serves as an agent of actions, nor is there any entity which causes the initiation and carrying out of actions. If no agent of actions exists, then there are no inherently existing characteristics of the actions themselves either. If the Bodhisattva completely understands dharmas of this sort, then he remains free of any attachment to any dharma. Because he is free of any attachment, he understands that no resulting karmic reward for good or bad karmic actions actually exists, understands that in the kindness which one practices, there is no self which exists at all, understands that in the compassion which one practices, there is no being which exists at all, understands that in the sympathetic joy which one practices, there is no life which exists at all, and understands that in the equanimity which one practices, there is no person which exists at all. Although he practices giving, he does not perceive the existence of anything which is given. Although he practices the upholding of moral prohibitions, he does not perceive the existence of a pure mind. Although he practices patience, he does not perceive the existence of any being. Although he practices vigor, no mind exists which engages in abandoning desire. Although he practices the training in jhana, no mind exists which engages in eliminating evil. Although he engages in the practice of wisdom, the mind nonetheless remains free of anything which is practiced. In relation to all objective conditions, in every case he manifests wisdom, and yet he does not indulge any attachment to wisdom, does not gain any wisdom, and does not perceive the existence of wisdom. The practitioner cultivates wisdom in this manner, and yet there is nothing cultivated and nothing not cultivated. For the sake of engaging in the transformative teaching of beings, he manifests the practice of the 6 perfections, and yet still remains inwardly pure. If the practitioner skillfully cultivates his mind in this way, as for those roots of goodness which he plants in just a single mind moment, the resulting rewards from such karmic blessings are incalculable and boundless, so much so that one could not come to the end of them even in 100,000 myriads of kotis of asamkheyas of kalpas. Such a practitioner naturally succeeds in drawing close to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Emptiness and Signlessness. At one time long ago, the Buddha was residing in the Karanda Venuvana bamboo grove together with the entire great assembly, which was gathered together in a countless multitude. At that time, as the Bhagavan was sequentially explaining the right Dharma, he told everyone in the great assembly, "The Dharmas proclaimed by the Tathagata are devoid of any inherently existent nature, are empty, and are devoid of anything whatsoever which exists therein." This is something which all inhabitants of the world find difficult to believe or understand. How is this the case? With respect to the form aggregate, there is neither any state of being bound up nor any state of being released. Feeling, perceptions, karmic formative factors, and consciousness too are such as do not involve either any state of being bound up or any state of being released. Form itself is devoid of any characteristic signs and exists apart from any characteristic signs. Feelings, perceptions, karmic formative factors, and consciousness too are themselves devoid of any characteristic signs and exist apart from any characteristic signs. Form itself is devoid of any thought imputing its existence and exists apart from any thought. Feelings, perceptions, karmic formative factors, and consciousness too are themselves devoid of any thought imputing their existence and exist apart from any thought. The same is true for the eye and visual forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and fragrances, the tongue and flavors, the body and tangibles, and the intellectual mind and its dharmas. There is no grasping and there is no relinquishing. There is no defilement and there is no purity. There is no going and there is no coming. There is no facing towards and there is no turning away. There is no darkness and there is no brightness. There is no delusion, and there is no wisdom. Nor is it the case that there is any this shore, any other shore, or any abiding within the flow. This is what is meant by the non-existence of any state of being bound up. Because there is no state of being bound up, they are empty of any inherent existence. Emptiness of inherent existence is itself a reference to signlessness, and even signlessness itself is empty. This is what is meant by emptiness. Emptiness is also just a reference to the absence of any thought imputing existence. The absence of any thought imputing existence is itself empty. This too is what is meant by emptiness. Any thought which even conceives of emptiness is itself empty. This too is what is meant by emptiness. In emptiness, there is no good and there is no evil, and so forth, even to the point that there does not exist any characteristic sign of emptiness either. It is on the basis of this that one speaks of emptiness. If a bodhisattva cognizes the nature of the aggregates, the sense realms, and the sense basis in this way, he straightway refrains from indulging in any clinging attachment. This is what then qualifies as patience with respect to dharmas. Because the bodhisattva has realized this type of patience, he is able to develop that very patience which is gained at the time of the prediction of eventual Buddhahood. Sons of the Buddha. By way of analogy, suppose there were a bodhisattva who, facing upwards, proceeded to write an empty space and then completely wrote out all of the 12 categories of scriptural text ever spoken by the Tathagata. Suppose then that one then passed through countless kalpas, wherein the Dharma of the Buddha so completely disappeared that persons seeking the Dharma would have no trace of it, which they might either see or hear. Suppose then that beings became so affected by inverted views that they created a boundless amount of evil karmic deeds, whereupon there came to be a wise man from some other region who, taking pity on those beings, searched widely for the Dharma of the Buddha. Next, suppose that, having traveled to this place, he observed the words written in space, noticed that the writing of the texts was distinctly clear, straightway understood them, studied them, recited them, preserved them, cultivated them in accordance with the manner in which they were taught, extensively expounded them, made detailed distinctions regarding their meaning, and by doing so thus benefited those beings. As for this writing in empty space, and this person who recognized the words written in space, are they such as one can either conceive of or describe? And yet, he did indeed succeed in proclaiming those teachings, passed them on, cultivated them, preserved them, used them to guide forth beings, and used them to influence beings to abandon the fetters which held them in bondage. Sons of the Buddha, the Tathagata has stated that at a time in the past, he sought the path to Bodhi and succeeded in encountering Buddhas numbering 33 kotis plus 98,000. During that time, he was in every case a wheel-turning sage king, who, using all manner of happiness-providing accoutrements, made offerings to those Buddhas and to their assemblies of disciples as well. Nonetheless, because he retained the concept of something which might be gained, he did not then succeed in receiving the prediction of eventual Buddhahood. Subsequently, he additionally encountered Pratyeka Buddhas numbering 84,000 kotis plus 90,000. In this case, too, he made offerings of the 4 requisites to the very end of each of his lives. After this had transpired, he additionally encountered 6,201,261 more Buddhas. Throughout that time, he was in every case a wheel-turning sage king, who, using all manner of happiness-providing accoutrements, made offerings. After each of those Buddhas had passed into cessation, he erected stupas made of the 7 precious things, and made offerings to their sharira. Then, whenever the next Buddha manifested in the world, he respectfully welcomed him, and, offering encouragements, requested him to turn the wheel of right Dharma. In this same fashion, he continued to make offerings to 100,000 myriads of kotis of Buddhas. All of these Tathagatas, even in the midst of empty dharmas, described the characteristic signs of dharmas. On account of retaining the concept of something which might be gained, he still failed during that time to receive the prediction. And so it continued on in this fashion until he met Burning Lamp Buddha, during the time when that Buddha was flourishing in the world. He met the Buddha, listened to the Dharma, and then straightaway realized the unproduced Dharma's patience. After he had realized this patience, he then succeeded in receiving the prediction. Burning Lamp Tathagata, even in the midst of empty dharmas, described the characteristic signs of dharmas, brought across to liberation countless hundreds of thousands of beings, and yet had nothing whatsoever which he spoke, and nobody whatsoever who he brought across to liberation. When Shakyamuni Tathagata came forth and flourished in the world, even in the midst of empty dharmas, he spoke of the existence of language and words, and thereby revealed the teachings, benefited and delighted beings, and caused universal acceptance and practice. Still, there was nothing whatsoever which he revealed, nor was there anybody whatsoever who accepted and practiced. Both the nature and characteristic signs of those dharmas at that time were all entirely empty of any inherent existence. The writing was itself empty, and so too was the person recognizing them also empty. The person explaining them was himself empty, and so too was anyone comprehending them also empty. From their very origin on forward, they were all empty. So too are they empty in the future, and so too are they empty in the present. Even so, the Bodhisattvas continue to accumulate the myriad sorts of goodness, this on account of the power of their skillful means. They remain intensely diligent and unrelenting in their perfect fulfillment of their stock of merit, and in their progressing towards realization of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. This is truly an extremely difficult endeavor which is inconceivable and indescribable. Even in the midst of non-existent dharmas, there continues to be the description of the characteristic signs of dharmas. And even in the midst of there being nothing whatsoever to be gained, one speaks of the existence of dharmas associated with gain. Matters of this sort are the exclusive domain of the Buddhas, who, when they employ their incalculably vast wisdom, are only then able to succeed in comprehending them. This is not something one can succeed in knowing solely through contemplative thought. The Bodhisattva, who has newly generated the resolve, sincerely reveres, is fond of, and delights in Bodhi. Based on his faith in the discourses of the Buddha, he gradually becomes able to succeed in gaining entry to it. What then is meant by faith? When equipped with faith, one contemplates the Four Truths. One then proceeds to eliminate the afflictions, false views, and fetters, and then finally succeeds in realizing arahatship. When equipped with faith, one contemplates the 12 causes and conditions. One proceeds to extinguish ignorance's production of actions, and then finally succeeds in realizing pratyeka Buddhahood. When equipped with faith, one proceeds to cultivate the 4 immeasurable minds and the 6 pāramitās. One then finally succeeds in realizing anuttara samyak sambodhi. This is what is known as patience rooted in faith. Throughout the time they have coursed in beginningless births and deaths, beings have grasped at phenomenal characteristics, have become attached, and have failed to perceive the nature of dharmas. One should first analytically contemplate one's own person as consisting of the 5 aggregates, which are only falsely designated as constituting a being. There is herein nothing whatsoever constituting a self, and nothing whatsoever constituting a being. How is it that this is the case? If a self actually did exist, then that self would be sovereignly independent. However, beings are constantly being invaded and injured by birth, aging, sickness, and death, and thus they fail to realize any sovereign independence. One should realize that there is no self. The absence of self is just the absence of any agent of actions. Not only is there no agent of actions, there is also no one who undergoes experiences. The nature of dharmas is pure, accords with reality, and constantly abides. When one contemplates analytically in this manner, but has not yet been able to carry such contemplations to their most ultimate point, this is what is known as acquiescence-based patience. After the Bodhisattva has cultivated both faith-based and acquiescence-based patience, it will not be long before he will also succeed in realizing the most superior form of patience with respect to dharmas. 12. On the merit and on preserving Dharma. The Bodhisattva perfects the cultivation of the mind cognizing signlessness, and so never allows his mind to abide in the carrying out of karmic deeds. The Bodhisattva realizes the empty nature of the characteristic signs of karmic deeds, and yet still deliberately engages in performing them. For the sake of cultivating roots of goodness and seeking Bodhi, he does not relinquish involvement in the conditioned. Because he cultivates the great compassion for the sake of all beings, he does not abide in the unconditioned. For the sake of realizing the genuine and sublime wisdom of all Buddhas, he does not relinquish involvement in the sphere of birth and death. For the sake of bringing a boundless number of beings across to liberation and allowing them to reside in the remainderless nirvana, he does not himself abide in nirvana. This is what constitutes the Bodhisattva Mahasattva's striving with profound mind for realization of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Sons of the Buddha. The Bodhisattva perfects 10 dharmas through which he never retreats from the unsurpassed Bodhi. What then are those 10? They are: first, the Bodhisattva generates with profound mind the resolve to gain the unsurpassed Bodhi, while also teaching beings so that they too are then caused to generate the same resolve. Second, he constantly delights in seeing the Buddhas, in respectfully giving offerings to them of whatsoever he most treasures, and in deeply planting roots of goodness. Third, for the sake of seeking the Dharma, he proceeds with a reverent mind to make offerings to the masters of Dharma and to listen tirelessly to the teaching of the Dharma. Fourth, if he encounters a circumstance where the Bhikshu Sangha has broken itself into 2 factions, involved in mutual contentiousness, accusations, and fault-finding, he diligently seeks to implement skillful means by which they are allowed to become harmoniously united again. Fifth, if he encounters a circumstance of increasing perversity and evil in his country, one whereby the Dharma of the Buddha verges on falling into ruin, he is able then to read out, recite, and expound on it, even if it be but a single verse through which he prevents the Dharma from being cut off. He then dedicates himself to preserving the Dharma, even to the point where he relinquishes any cherishing regard for his own physical life. Sixth, whenever he encounters beings beset by the suffering and the affliction of fearfulness, he acts to rescue and protect them, thus bestowing fearlessness on them. Seventh, he initiates a diligent cultivation practice through which he seeks out such extremely profound sutra dharmas as these from the Vaipulya Mahayana's treasury of Bodhisattva scriptures. Eighth, after he has found such dharma, he accepts and upholds it through study, recitation, practicing it as taught, and through abiding in a manner which accords with its dictates. Ninth, he himself abides in the Dharma, while also being able to exhort, lead, and otherwise cause a multitude of beings to enter into this Dharma. 10th, after they have entered into this Dharma, he develops competence in explaining it for their sakes, revealing and teaching it, benefiting and delighting them, and thereby causing those beings to awaken. In a circumstance where the Bodhisattva perfects 10 dharmas of this sort, he will never retreat from the unsurpassed Bodhi. The Bodhisattva should cultivate this sutra in this manner. Sutras such as this are inconceivable and indescribable. Specifically, they are able to produce all seeds of the great kindness and great compassion. This sutra is able to awaken, lead forth, and guide beings constrained by the fetters, influencing them to generate their resolve to realize Bodhi. This sutra is able to act as the initiating cause for those proceeding towards Bodhi. This sutra is able to establish the unmoving practice of all bodhisattvas. This sutra is worthy to be one of which all Buddhas of the past, future, and present are protectively mindful. If there be a son or daughter of good family who wishes to diligently cultivate and accumulate the unsurpassed Bodhi, they should extensively proclaim and circulate sutras such as these, thus preventing them from being cut off in the lands of Jambudvipa, and thus causing a countless and boundless number of beings to succeed in hearing this sutra. If there be sons or daughters of good family who succeed in hearing this sutra, persons such as these all come into possession of the accumulation of the fiercely sharp, inconceivable, and indescribable great wisdom, and shall also gain an incalculably great karmic reward in the form of merit. Why is this the case? It is because this sutra is able to open pure wisdom eyes incalculable in their number. It is able to cause the lineage of the Buddhas to continue on and not be cut off. It is able to rescue countless beings beset by suffering and affliction. It is able to illuminate the darkness of all forms of ignorance. It is able to rout the 4 types of demons and demolish demonic karma. It is able to destroy the erroneous views of all non-Buddhist traditions. It is able to extinguish the great blaze of all afflictions. It is able to melt away all of the karmic formative actions generated through the chain of causes and conditions. It is able to cut off covetousness, the breaking of the moral precepts, hatred, indolence, mental distraction, and delusion, these 6 extremely grave disorders. It is able to eliminate karmic obstacles, retribution obstacles, obstacles to Dharma, the obstacle of afflictions, the obstacle of views, the obstacle of ignorance, obstacles to cognition, and the obstacle of habitual propensities. To sum up the essentials, this sutra is able to cause all evil dharmas without exception to be completely melted away and disappear. It is able to cause all good dharmas to increase and grow like a flaming blaze. If there be a son or daughter of good family who, having heard this sutra, delights in it, becomes fondly pleased by it, and is inspired to thoughts admiring its rarity, one should realize that this person has already made offerings to countless Buddhas and has already deeply planted roots of goodness. How is this the case? This sutra is one which has been carried out in practice by all Buddhas of the 3 periods of time. Hence, the practitioner who succeeds in hearing this sutra should celebrate his good fortune in acquiring such a great and fine benefit. If there be someone who writes out, studies, or recites the sutra, one should realize that the resulting merit-based blessings gained by this person are incalculable and boundless. Why is this? The objective sphere encompassed by the teachings of the sutra is boundless. This is because it promotes the flourishing generation of countless vows, because it draws in all beings, and because it involves the adornment of unsurpassed Bodhi. Thus, the merit-based blessings gained in reward are themselves boundless in this very same way. If one is able to comprehend its meaning, and then proceed to cultivate in accordance with what it teaches, even if all Buddhas attempted for asamkhyayas of kalpas with their inexhaustible wisdom to describe the karmic rewards generated by this, not even they could come to the end of them. If there be a place where a master of the Dharma has taught this sutra, one should realize that one should erect a stupa on this site. Why? This is because that place is one in which genuine right Dharma was brought forth. In whatsoever place this sutra abides, whether it be a country, city, village, monastery, temple, or serene monastic abode, one should realize that the Dharma body itself abides therein. If a person makes offerings there of incense, flowers, music, hanging banners, pennants, canopies, songs, verses, praises, pressed palms, or expressions of reverence, one should realize that this person has already himself participated in the carrying on of the lineage of the Buddhas. How much the more so is this true in the case of one who in the most complete fashion upholds the Sutra. Persons such as these perfect the adornments consisting of merit and of wisdom. In a future life, they are bound to receive the prediction of eventual Buddhahood. They will definitely succeed in realizing Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. End of a treatise on the Generating the Bodhi Resolve Sutra.